Welcome to Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan. Thank you, NEK-TV, for always allowing us to do this show. Our featured guest today is Tim Ashe, who is the candidate for the state auditor in the upcoming election. Welcome, Tim. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just trying to stay warm, and I hope you are as well.
Yeah, I know. I make sure I go wherever there's heat. So a little selfish that way. It's like, okay, do you have heat? Okay, I'll come in.
I've been tending to our pipes to make sure they don't freeze, which has become an issue over the last week.
Yeah, that's scary. And we, the same thing here. It's like oh my gosh, when you worry about people that way and,
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
highly concerning. So hopefully no freezing, no water leaks, and everybody stays safe and warm. Okay, you ready, set to go here? We're
Right.
gonna find out all about your campaign to be the next auditor for the state of Vermont. So I'd like to start out, if you don't mind, with one of the criteria would be skills and competency. You can talk about education, certification, any experience you have, and then we'll go into the nitty-gritty as to why you believe personally that you should become the next state auditor.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate you having me on. And, just a little by way of background about the office first. And I know that you know this well, but many of your viewers probably don't wake up every morning with a fully informed sense of what the state auditor's office does every day and kind of the duties. So, and the abridged version is that the state auditor's office both does the financial audit of the state of Vermont, so make sure the state's finances are in order. And as a complement to that, make sure it's using federal funds appropriately. And then the bulk of the staff who are in the office conduct what are called performance audits, which are more about taking a deep dive into particular programs of state government and trying to make sure that they're meeting the objectives that had been set out in statute or in rules, and that Vermont taxpayers are getting bang for their buck. So those are the kind of two short versions of what the office does. So, in terms of readiness and skill set for the role, I bring a pretty broad group of experiences to the office if I'm lucky enough to get it. In terms of facility or understanding of state government, I've been quite immersed over time, wearing different hats in a wide range of state policies. I served as a municipal official like yourself. I also was in the state senate for 12 years. I've been the deputy state auditor for 4.5, going on 5 years. And from my private life, both as a housing developer and as the chair of the Community Health Center Board, which is a huge primary care system of facilities in northwestern Vermont, have interacted with a wide variety of state agencies. So one of the most important things is having a broad understanding of all the aspects of state government, because when you're making decisions about how to use the office's resources to be the watchdog for taxpayers, it's important to know what matters, what are the high impact areas of state government that affect normal people's lives, what questions to be asking to kind of cut through some of the noise and get to the heart of the matter. I think that there's a lot to be said for the experience actually directly engaging with these different agencies. In terms of, sort of personal skill set, in addition to graduate work, which included some accounting and auditing work at the Kennedy School of Government, have been a housing developer where I was sort of building both development budgets and operational budgets for very large housing, affordable housing developments. And then consulting with various housers across the state. That, in some ways, was really the beginning of my feeling of comfort with all of the kind of gory details of financial analysis. In more recent years, having been the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, which had its sort of authority over a wide range of financial matters for the state, helping write the state budget. That gave me a bit of a state-specific insight into those things. And now, one of my personal passions, and I'll wrap up here, has been healthcare and healthcare costs. And this has been something I've been very concerned about for many years. I was a bit of a squeaky wheel as much as a decade ago about where things were heading in terms of hospital spending and the viability of our smaller community hospitals if something didn't change. And of course, many of those things have now proven quite true, unfortunately. But being the chair of the Community Health Center Board and watching how completely disjointed and dysfunctional our healthcare financing system is, so much so that we have a small number of hospitals who are sitting on huge sums of money, while the small community hospitals, whether it's North Country in the Newport area, whether it's Grace Cottage or Brattleboro, you name the small hospitals, they're struggling just to do the basics. And it is largely I think a failure of the regulatory process, leadership at a bunch of levels. And I've been seeing that in my role where our community health center has been struggling because primary care doesn't get paid a lot. So I mentioned that to say that one of my primary areas of focus will be trying to use appropriate oversight from the auditor's office to try to start driving down those healthcare costs and hold government accountable to do so.
So I'm thanking you for bringing up all of those points, which is going to lead me now into two different areas that exactly on what you just said, okay? Because clearly you've hit the experience level. There's no question on the background and experience and all of those areas that you need to have touched upon to become the auditor of the state of Vermont, in my opinion, in professionals' opinions, I would so believe. You did bring up something now, which takes me to professional skepticism, which is very important for an auditor because they have to come in with an unbiased position. Right. You don't want to come in and say, I'm going to do a performance audit and already have the decision you want to
make.
The
opinion I already have. Yeah.
Right. So how will you, and tell me about how you have, say, honed your skill set to be able to go into these healthcare issues, knowing that you've already, and there's nothing wrong with bringing in your experience at all. Yeah. But knowing that you are going to look at just the evidence, just the facts, and come up with a report that you are comfortable to independently provide to the public.
Yeah, it's a great question because, the best value you can give to Vermonters is to focus on the issues they care most about and that they're most affected by. Healthcare costs, housing costs, property taxes. But the auditor's office, just as you point out, is not a policy setting operation. It is about determining what the facts are to allow policymakers and the executive branch to make better decisions. And so for me, the key is to take healthcare as an example. It is a state policy to try to reduce healthcare costs. Now, the question is, what is that objective that the state has set out? Right now, our health insurance premiums are double the national average. If the legislature and the governor agreed that we should be closer to the national average, then the office could look at the array of policies and investments that the state is making and say, is there evidence to suggest that these are pushing costs down in the direction of that national average? So it takes the philosophy or editorial out of the auditor's role, but rather gives the auditor the target that has been established by others to then judge the state's performance against. And so, I've spent for 5 years, I've been, as you put it, honing, but I've sort of become very comfortable compartmentalizing the way I would do things if I had a magic wand, the world according to Tim, versus the appropriate role of the state auditor's office, which is to park your own views off to the side and let the facts and the facts alone speak to the work.
Well, that's very important, and I think very important for our listeners to understand, because as we all know, once you're an elected official, criticisms out there, and the auditor needs to come in as the messenger, and it's just too bad. You just have to live with it, and when you're elected, it is what it is, right? But you're going to be able, as I hear and as I believe, you're going to be able to not go down rabbit holes, or know when you do go down the rabbit holes to step back, because you can distinguish between the facts and the evidence.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
there's one other, like, the 12 staff auditors of the office. It's a small operation. This is not an unwieldy government bureaucracy, but they are obligated to follow our professional standards manual, which is really their Bible to make sure that they're following generally accepted government auditing standards. And so if the elected auditor or the deputy, my current role, starts spouting off with opinions, it can compromise the objective, independent work of the staff auditors. And so that's another really important thing that you have to keep being mindful of, is not to get dragged into making policy statements that sort of start to compromise or undercut the independent, objective work of the audit staff. And so I've become very sensitive to that. The team of auditors we have, sometimes agencies, when we do an audit, they don't like the results, but they never question the facts, and they never question the objectivity of the audit staff who are doing the work. And there's an important sort of tone at the top quality from the auditor, him or herself, to make sure that there's a through line from the top to the bottom of the office of objectivity, so that the work itself always stands on its own.
That is spot on. I mean, and that's a very difficult task for the auditor, because the auditor not only has to relay all of this confidence to the public, but you also have to get the public to understand that you are setting the tone from the top down to your staff. And you know what? It's okay for staff to come and say, I smell something, we need to go here. But you need to be the one to rein them back in when they're, we're not news reporters.
Correct.
We're not investigating the news. We're investigating the facts and then supporting it with the evidence. So you have clearly been able to identify that distinction.
And where it's sometimes, I mean, just on a personal level, where it sometimes is awkward is, I frequently receive calls or emails from legislators who say, what should we do about this? And I say, well, we can't really be making suggestions like that at the moment, because then we would be put in an awkward position if we ever wanted to audit the outcome of your work. So, we will have to be we are very careful. I've had to become very careful about saying, there are options available to you that others have, to kind of point them to places where others have opined, but we be very clear, we are not advocating for one course of action. That is your responsibility. We need to preserve our independence, so that should we need to come in and evaluate it, we're not, we haven't been sort of contaminated by an advocacy for a particular choice. So there's been a lot of that, because as many legislators and even some executive branch officials, sometimes they're just desperate for the right answer, and it's hard. So they're looking for people who have thought about some of these things a lot. And then we have to say, look, there's a line in the sand that we can't cross.
And exactly. And, also legislators, the general public, they don't really understand what an auditor does. An auditor isn't an accountant. An auditor is an entirely different animal, just like an attorney follows their license, entirely different animal. It comes with a criteria that is so distinct and removed from the common understanding of, the auditor isn't the person to say, give me advice on this. A financial consultant is, but not your state auditor. And so for you to bring that up, it's very important. That whole independence, the whole skepticism is crucial. Now, you've been in there almost 5 years. And I must say, people say you should have experience at least in this arena between 2 to 6 years before you go and say, I'm taking the reins and I'm going to run. So you clearly are in there and you clearly have experience not only in the whole gamut of criteria, but in the office itself.
Yeah.
So what would you do differently? Because we know, regardless of who is the auditor, there's always going to be criticism. And you brought up political issues. Some
Yeah.
people say that the former auditor was too political, and which is not saying it's true or false, but that's
Sure.
out there. So
Yeah.
what would you do different?
Yeah, because there are some people, and we've both encountered people like this. We've probably been accused of being like this ourselves. I don't know, but we both know people who run for office because they want to be in office, and sometimes they don't first begin with the question, "Do I actually want this office?" And
Good.
so they're having been in this role almost 5 years. I had to really have a heart-to-heart with myself about, do I actually want to serve as Vermont state auditor? I've been happy to be the deputy state auditor, and then it's a real tough decision to say, do I want to be in that role with the responsibility and that level of impact, whether it's high or low? And so, to me, I had to make a couple personal decisions about whether it was an appropriate fit for me. And the key one that tipped over the edge was, can I have an impact on the outcome of events in a positive way? And that's a tricky one when you're in the auditor's office, because you're not passing a new bill, you're not giving some flowery speech that inspires people, or it's unlikely. It could be, maybe at a CPA convention, but to
You'll
me,
be sleeping at the CPA convention.
to me, one of the most important things that could happen right now out of the auditor's office is helping rebuild people's confidence that government can be counted on to tackle problems. And I think that the best way to help rehabilitate people's trust and confidence in government, and in state government in particular in this case, is to help shine a light on state government when it is doing a good job, but also to have a certain tone when it's not doing an A-plus job, that is about encouragement to deliver excellence rather than kind of finger wagging. And so I always think, if you want to convince the public that government can deliver results, the best way to do it is for government to deliver results. And so the auditor's office has the opportunity to be the sort of voice narrating government's attempts to deliver quality services to Vermonters. And so I worked for Bernie Sanders, right out of UVM, and I used to describe him as brilliance by repetition. I think most Vermonters could give his speeches oftentimes, like they could turn the volume down and give the speech themselves, because they've heard the themes again and again and again. And so I think the auditor's office has the ability to do that on the themes of government performance, government accountability, and building that culture of excellence, and not having it be like one press release about that and then you move on to the next shiny object and the next shiny object, but have it be the banner theme that animates a tenure as the state auditor. And I think that could have a really powerful impact, as subtle as it may seem. This is a time when people really, I don't think, look to state government and say, yeah, I'm really confident they're gonna crack the toughest nuts around. Like but yet we know there's excellence across state government every day. So that to me is the key, is celebrating it where we see it, and then having a really positive attitude about bringing up the level when we see that there's a deficit.
So you brought up performance audits, which is very important because that's what the state auditor does. And that, which is audits and federal, funding that, are outside in the public, is distinct from the government. So in your performance audits, you are going to not only look to see that the goals are being met and costs are being, used appropriately, you're also looking for waste fraud, abuse. And that's not a horrible thing. It's not like fraud, oh my God, criminal investigation. Okay, it's a different, entirely different animal when we're doing auditing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's, waste, fraud, and abuse is the sort of the three words that sort of tagline most auditing work by government audit offices. And I think I would bet if we polled 100 people, more than 90% would believe that that really is all about someone who's willfully going out and like accessing benefits to which they're not eligible, or a medical provider falsely billing for services. And that is clearly fraudulent behavior. And we, from time to time, we get whistleblower complaints that point us in those directions. We work with other agencies who have internal audit functions to try to snuff out those types of instances. But waste and abuse fall in a bit more of a gray zone, I'd say, where it's often the misapplication of eligibility. It's inadvertent misuse of funds. It is poor controls and procedures that allow dollars to slip through the cracks. And I'll give an example. We, in the office, about a year ago, we released an audit about basically it's the MFRAU, one of these great acronyms. It's the Medicaid Fraud Unit within the state's Medicaid program. And we wanted to understand how they proceeded when they learned that a provider had overbilled. I'm kind of
Sure.
oversimplifying here.
Sure.
And there were, each year there are a number of instances where these payments that go to providers get flagged as not seeming appropriate. And if I were to summarize each of them, almost all the instances were not what you would think of as classic fraud cases, where it was a deliberate attempt to make money for not doing something and then billing the government and having taxpayers split the bill. But it might be, in the case of a medical provider, having a new doctor perform some procedures and then submit bills to the state, but the doctor hadn't quite got all the paperwork done yet. So they were on the way. They were totally licensed. They had all the credentials and they were appropriate for the scope of service, but they hadn't yet got the paperwork in. And so, but technically they are not allowed to get paid until that paperwork's in. So when we talk about, waste and abuse, those are often the kinds of examples we find in Vermont. Thankfully, they're not willful embezzlement schemes. But those are the kind of types of things that we're also looking for, not just the, criminal or near criminal instances.
Yeah, more importantly, the compliance.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
More importantly, internal controls, compliance, and then doing your report recommendations on, hey, watch your timelines. This is what you need to know.
That's exactly right. And the procedures, it's the least sexy stuff for the public, right? When we say your internal controls have weaknesses which could allow inappropriate billing. So, revisit them and tighten up these controls so that the permissions are in place and the right procedures. The public hears that and they say, sounds like a lot of paper pushing. But the success is when you do not see waste, fraud, and abuse. And so it's almost like a activity of the auditor's office or any auditor's office that you suffer for your success because the world never knows because they don't hear about anything going wrong. So I think in some ways it's both a testament to a lot of the state's administrators, but also auditors and those concerned with internal controls at all level that we see it so infrequently. It means that people take this culture of compliance seriously, and it's not in service of just checking boxes. It's in service of making sure that the money is used properly, which of course is the most important thing.
So as the auditor, there's an expectation that impeccable ethics will exist. Wow. Okay. Makes you go back and say, oh my goodness, I stayed out past 7:30. Is that going to come out when I was 3, and so that is that's hard. It's not just be ethical. It's impeccable ethics, accountability at the highest standard.
Yep.
I mean, judges hold you at a higher level of accountability. It's already there. You have a higher fiduciary responsibility. You want to go back and rethink about why you want to do this? No.
Yeah, right. Well, I'd like to say I'm perfect in every way, and therefore there's no worries there. But we're all human, and that's where where people get tripped up.
So conflicts of interest would be a way to prove that, right? You would go in, and do you think you'd have many conflicts of interest, and how would you deal with them?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I feel this is going to sound strange, but I feel somewhat fortunate that I've been dealing with sort of an ethical conflict issue for 20 plus years. So my partner runs 7 Days newspaper,
Okay.
which is the largest print publication in the state. And when I first ran for city council in Burlington many moons ago, they had to scratch their heads and say, well, how do we cover Tim and make it clear to the readers that we are, because they themselves have their own ethical code, right? So they're trying to make sure that the public understands who I am. But then what role could Paula have in her own paper in terms of editorial judgment over pieces that I might be in, or over municipal issues? And so that need to keep a firewall traveled with us year after year. And as my different roles in public life changed and are there to this day. So we have had to live that sort of ethical boundary in a very serious way for a long time. Now, that's different than, the sort of standards, for the state auditor, but it's a way of thinking about this, which is very relevant. So, when I think about, if in November of 26, I'm elected state auditor, which I hope I am, if I am, but presenting the sort of potential universe of concerns that people might have is the first step, right? So it's not going to be a surprise when I tell people that my partner runs 7 Days newspaper, but I will make sure to disclose that. They already do disclaim it every time I appear in a news story. My legislative...
But that type of related party issue probably wouldn't have an effect on what you would be doing as the auditor, but you should disclose it, of course.
Correct.
But I would doubt your partner is going to go in and say, hey, you know what? Cut me a check.
You're exactly right. I would say that's more for like the sort of high level confidence that the office is operating independently. I've been on boards of directors and have to disclose that internally when we do our independence reports for each audit. So I've had to fill out our independence report for several dozen projects in the last number of years. And I always have disclosed that I was on the Humane Society board up until this past December. That one, I would disclose it, but it never really presented an issue. I have been on the Community Health Center board, and now the chair. I've disclosed that. That one is more likely to possibly bleed over because the Community Health Center is a recipient of Medicaid dollars. It is a participant in, it's received OneCare funds, which is one of the state's healthcare reform things, which we did an audit of. It was kind of unrelated, but so that one, I would have to make a decision about, do I stay on the board or not? And if I stayed, that's a disclosure, which is a really important one. And then there's one that I would probably seek others' advice on this one. But when I first joined the auditor's office, I was coming fairly freshly out of the legislature. And so there were policies and spending decisions, which I had been in the thick of. And so we sort of handled that on a case-by-case basis in my first year or two to create a little separation so that if it was something that I had been really involved in, that I disclosed it upfront in my independence forms, and we would decide as a group whether it, had any potential, conflict and what we could do to mitigate those conflicts. It'll have been quite a long time since I've been in the legislature, so I don't see that as a particular conflict. But then also like financial holdings, I have a good fortune of not having a big fortune, so
there you go.
I do not have a tremendous number of things. So I don't have much to report other than like the conventional like state pension system, which I'm a part of, and things like that. So, but I would disclose all my financial,
Yeah. Which are
anything I
not
had, which is
conflicts of interest. I mean, you're allowed to have a
right.
mortgage or allowed have allowed to,
Sure, sure. But
do all of
the disclosure though itself is, I think, important. And now state officials are required to do some limited
right.
financial disclosure, and I would
Yeah, we had to
obviously,
do that when I was in the,
yeah.
I think we voted for that.
I think we might have. Yeah, no.
Oh well, but seriously though, you come with that gamut of experience regarding regulatory areas as being in the Senate, and bringing that out, which is also a strong requirement for somebody running for the head auditor
Yeah.
position of a state. Various states have different requirements. Vermont says you have to live here. Okay, you meet that one, right? Okay, I don't think there's an age limit, right? We saw that with the governor's office as well.
Yeah.
So anyone could come out and run against you. Watch out for that newborn baby who just
Yeah, right.
came out. But on the regulatory side, you come with regulatory knowledge. So local laws, very important. Related to government funding, you brought this up yourself, and single audits. Give us a little bit of your take on what the people need to know. Do they even know what a single audit is?
Well, they don't know what a single audit is. That's the short answer. But the longer answer is a single audit is required by the federal government, and this basically it's a spot check of all of the major areas of federal funding that pass through to the states. So whether it's transportation, Medicaid, special education is a big one, food nutrition programs, the stuff we're seeing in Minnesota, like that is the kind of
Right.
thing that the single audit at least touches on a bit. So agriculture programs, all of the big ones. Now, what that the single audit, what it often does, and this is the reason people should care about it, even if they're not going to read the multi-hundred-page document, is that if the state misuses federal funds, either because it dispenses money to people who aren't supposed to receive it, or it uses money for reasons that are not eligible uses under the federal program, is that the state could be required to pay it back. And
There you go.
and paying the money back to the feds, sometimes people hear like, oh, well, the federal government's saying that we might have to give them back $10 million. Well, the $10 million has almost always already been spent, which means that $10 million is going to come out of the hides of Vermont taxpayers. It's not just returning federal funds. And that is why, the work we do and the contractor we hire to do the single audit behind the scenes is very critical. And we spend a lot of time making sure that the state agencies who are subject to the review are participating very actively in the sort of back and forth with the audit team. And we find things from time to time which won't be surprising, like the Department of Labor has really been struggling the last few years. There's been findings year after year about their capacity to both present information to the federal government to make sure that like unemployment insurance benefits are being managed in the way that they're supposed to be. And so we flag a lot of important kind of procedural and control concerns through the single audit. So anyways, that's on the federal money side, is that we don't want to have to give a lot of money back. That's ours. That's the key.
But you brought up a very important point, and I remember when I was in the legislature on, some of the money on a money committee, brought that up as well, because you don't want the state of Vermont is not to become a debt collector.
Right.
The money's gone. And so the only way you can get it is through the taxpayers. And that's an education that I believe is lacking for the
Yeah.
legislators.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. I think it's easy for people to look to the work of the state auditor's office and hear about compliance and hear about findings and material weaknesses and significant deficiencies, all these terms which are sort of audits, important audit terms. And they think, oh, well, someone else is dealing with that. We get to focus on our work over here. No, they all go together.
Mhm.
And so one of the biggest concerns that I have about state government is it's getting harder and harder both to retain long-term talented staff who have financial skills and it's getting harder and harder to recruit them. And so, I mean, this is a problem at all levels of government, but state government over time is starting to have more and more. We don't see as many people who are going to be lifers in some of these roles in state government, 20 years in finance and management, or 15 years doing compliance at Agency of Transportation. People are moving through jobs much faster, and that puts the whole system at a little bit greater risk. That's why having systems in place is so important. So it's not as dependent on the individual, but rather you have policies and procedures to take care of that. I have one of the things I want to focus on, actually, if I get the office.
Of course, this is your show.
Well, at the municipal level, I also have I won't say grave concerns, but I have very serious concerns about the capacity at the local level to both find qualified financial professionals. I bet if we did a survey right now of municipalities and asked how many have a current financial audit, the number, it's not going to be 100%. In part, it's because they can't find auditing firms who will do the financial audits. That's one. I mean, that's a whole other issue. The
nor do they have the people in-house who can provide the information appropriately to the auditors, because those people either need to move on and be, new people need to come in. And so the analysis at the municipal level of who's going in and how they're changing to move forward is so important.
Sure. And some of these people, of course, are elected to these financial roles. And
yes,
elections, I mean, here I am. Both of us have been in elections. And so we hope the voters made good decisions when they picked us. Right. But financial decisions at the local level are often being made by people who've been elected. It doesn't necessarily mean they have the financial skills that are really necessary for that community. So not only is it a staff and human resource issue, but then there's just the capacity problem that presents. There's federal money available to small towns being left on the table because they don't have people in-house to even apply for the money from, say, USDA Rural Development, or you name the agency. So it creates this very problematic sort of downward spiral for a lot of small rural communities. They suffer from having weak financial resources, assets in place, but then because of that, they can't access some of the other resources which would help the community revitalize and have more economic activity or more housing, or you name the positive thing that could happen in a small town. So I'm thinking ahead and trying to think about how to partner with other groups like the Vermont League of Cities and Towns and others, not to come in as the auditor's office and say, we're going to take on these duties. That would be way beyond our ability. But to say, what are the things that we might be able to advocate for with the legislature and with the governor's team to provide more resources for some of these important local activities, so that we don't, because of neglect or hoping the problem will just solve itself, find communities starting to run afoul in some pretty serious ways. We're creating serious risks of waste, fraud, and abuse, let's put it that way right now, by not arming communities with more resources.
And bringing that up, you would also, in your role, need to be very careful not to cross that independence line, because when you use the word advocacy, I understand what you mean. But the general public will take it more as an activist stance.
Sure,
so
I think
that's
what
not
we would
what
say is
meant,
we would probably describe it in risk terms, and
correct.
say, we've assessed the sort of financial strengths and resources available to small communities. And what we've identified are the following kind of risk factors. One of the risk factors is we have open treasurer positions or open financial manager positions at dozens of small towns as a result, So, and to describe the playing field so that others can decide whether they want to put resources on the table to help kind of mitigate some of those risks. And I think it's an overdue analysis. And I know that there are people who are certainly trying to figure out ways to mitigate some of these risks, but it seems a little disjointed right now. And I think the auditor's office can at least, because people look to the auditor's office to identify these things, I think we can.
I think it's a phenomenal area that you need to look at, and I appreciate the fact that you brought that up.
Well, I know you had your own experience.
Absolutely.
As mayor.
Boom. That's
Yep.
exactly right. And you'd be surprised at what the systems that need to be put in place, the reassessment, and you're dealing with elected officials who are the
Mhm.
local legislators. So, your hands are tied in certain areas, but there needs to be change. And it needs to be done appropriately for the benefit of the taxpayers, and as
That's right.
well as, the moving forward of these towns and cities so that they can access appropriately funds. And there's that security with the oversight of the auditor's office, which is the key, the oversight. So now you would be stepping out of the hands-on role,
Yep.
less, coming in and touchy-feely, and being the big guru. You would have to bring in a deputy auditor. You've now touched upon that area. I
Yep.
don't know if you have anyone that you're thinking of, or 25 people that you're thinking of, or no one that you're thinking, but those are big considerations.
Yeah.
And you may be thinking within the office itself of rearranging some positions. Have you given thought to if you might be restructuring your office or not?
It's I have a lot of hurdles to get over to before that, but I've been instead thinking about, are there new, I don't want to say initiatives with some flashy sense, but are there new kind of interventions that I think the office uh, might make that would be helpful for it to make, and that might drive some of those decisions. And I'll give an example. Most Vermonters will not know that there is something called the Chief Performance Office. It's in the executive branch. It's not far, literally, from the governor's office. There's two people out of 8,000 state employees who are in the Chief Performance Office. So people can judge whether that's the right ratio. But one of the things they try to do is educate and train people in different state programs all across state government in things like lean improvements and better performance measurement and evaluation techniques. So they don't have the ability to go out and do it for everybody. They try to train people so that it creates a culture of this kind of way of thinking
Mm-hmm.
and discipline. And there's a part of me which wonders if there's not a role that could be played in some way where there's the auditor's office is a little bit more like a roving technical team, or has some people dedicated to that purpose. Now they would probably have to be kind of compartmentalized off, and it would have to be a deliberate initiative where these individuals are able to go in and say, all right, staff of this program, we're going to sit down and have you walk us through these processes, have us show your controls that you have in place for this particular activity, and we're going to spend a short period of time with you and start identifying some themes that we want to hand off to you so that you can be taking a look. So something short of a full-blown audit, but something that starts to kind of prompt thinking in a broader way across government, almost to complement what that Chief Performance Office does. So I mentioned that not to say that I'm firmly sold that that's a good use of the time.
I
But
think
that,
it's a good use of the time. I'm thinking though and of course this is just my so
yeah,
definitional mindset from my background. It's more of your own compliance officer who might go out around there to gather the data and
yeah,
bring it back to your office to explain the needs and then make those training recommendations, just to keep it distinct from
yeah.
actually becoming operational.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh,
No,
you know,
that's true. So the reason I say that
but
is
it's a great idea.
those are the ideas bubbling in my head, which would then drive decisions about whether positions should be changed. With an office of 16, there's only so much flexibility built in there, and and I don't. The office has, I think, grown from 15 to 16 over the course of the last 10 years. So this is not. There has not been a significant amount of change in terms of the number of people. And so there's only a handful of flexible positions. So it's not an area where you can walk in on day one and suddenly everything's going to be fundamentally different. The areas of inquiry can be different. The tone can change. There's a number of things that can be different day one, but it will take some care to think about how we might establish some new initiatives, and that would drive the position decisions that you were asking about.
And as the auditor, you're entitled to retain consultants, if appropriate, once you know they're independent on specific projects, specific performance audits. You're entitled to bring that in if so necessary. And as the auditor, you would then be going more to the conventions and the different organizations across the states, right? So you would be allowed, and in fact, you would be bringing in all of the information of the other United States of America auditors. So that is so important, to have it one-on-one with you, as opposed to having, say, the current auditor tell you what happened.
Yeah.
This way you would be actually saying, oh, this is how I interpret it. This is how it could affect Vermont. And so that is very important. I don't know how many people have come out to run yet for the auditor. They still have some time, right?
Right.
But I haven't seen anybody coming in from who I've seen come out with the experience level yet. And I'm sure that, we don't know if anyone else is coming out or not.
Right.
But what do you think? What do you want to tell the public now in your last minutes here with us? Why should they vote for you?
Yeah,
Convince me.
yeah. Well, all right. That's probably the right question to sort of wrap on. But I think that my starting point in the whole discussion about state auditor's role and my desire to be the state auditor is a basic premise which I've had from day one in public life, which is I believe Vermonters deserve excellence from state government, and that everything derives from that. And I feel, as someone who believes and recognizes the ability of government to play a helpful role in improving people's lives, in addressing environmental issues that individuals and businesses can't do themselves all on their own. So those of us who believe in the importance and potential of government often find ourselves making excuses for why things aren't going well. It's always the reason you can't sign up for healthcare on Vermont Health Connect. Well, it's because of some technical issue. The reason you're waiting so long at the DMV is because of an IT system. It's always sort of, the orientation is to make excuses for it. And my attitude has always been, we should not be in the excuse making. We should be in the how do we make it better business. And so that is the sort of mantra, that is the culture, that's the message for me at all times. So if you pair that with, I think, my focus and pretty determined and well-established focus on what I would call the bread and butter issues in terms of bringing a spotlight and accountability in state government around healthcare costs, property taxes, housing affordability, homelessness issues, which of course are a huge issue in communities.
Sure.
And people have come to believe these problems are just persistent. And, I don't believe they're persistent. I believe that they can be tackled. They're hard, but they require the type of independent analysis that doesn't just rely on wishful thinking, but says what's working, and therefore probably merits more resources, what's not working and should either be discontinued or have resources pulled back. And so at the, end of the day, people will not see banner headlines saying auditor passes new law, because that's not the auditor's role. They're not going to see those kinds of things. But if what they get from the auditor's office, and I expect they will get this from me if I'm fortunate enough to have the position, is auditor kept ringing the bell of accountability and performance and demanding results on these key issues, didn't get distracted with a lot of things, but just stayed on top of those core issues. And that moved the direction of the executive and legislative branches in particular in ways that benefited Vermonters. I will have considered it a job well done. So that's sort of my mindset. And I hope that, the skill set I bring to the table makes me likely to succeed if given the chance.
I love that, ringing the bell, because that is exactly what your job is to ring that bell, okay? Bring them all back, ring the bell, and let's look at the facts and the
Right.
evidence again. So, as the auditor, you would also be required to hold some statutory board positions.
Yes, we have.
And
Yes, we do.
could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we over time the laws have changed a little bit about where the auditor's office sits in these organizations that are either quasi-governmental, mostly quasi-governmental. So the auditor has a non-voting role on the UVM Board of Trustees, and so I attend many of those meetings on the auditor's behalf. We keep tabs on, I mean, because University of Vermont, of course, is as the flagship university. There's huge federal resources and state resources, so we keep tabs on both the audit functions that are occurring in-house at UVM, the results of their external audits, and their different policies and procedures. The auditor or a designee sits on CDAC, which is the state's. It's a committee of individuals, including the treasurer and others, who recommend what the annual amount of capital borrowing should be. And so that is might sound like a sleepy committee, but when people wonder why our state buildings are maybe not being kept up very well, or when they hear that we don't have enough money to replace the women's facility, the women's prison, which has been a sore spot for many years.
Right, yeah.
Hot topic, the question of, do we even have the money to fix it or replace it if we made one of those choices? Those are decisions that come out of this committee in terms of the overall allowed or recommended amount of borrowing. So the auditor sits there, and the auditor can follow money to many other entities if they're state dollars. For instance, VEDA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and VSAC, the Student Loan Group. So these are a little outside the typical work of the auditor's office, but because so much state money goes to them and they have such an outsized role in the Vermont economy, those are areas that I think probably are worth a revisit from the auditor's office about whether those dollars are achieving what the legislature intended when those organizations were set up. And so that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down, except to say that there's the budget that people think about that the legislature passes, but then it's almost like there's a whole shadow budget on top of that of these authorities who are able to raise and spend huge sums of money, and those have to be considered as part of the totality of what's being looked at.
And when you sit as the auditor on those boards or those, quasi-judicial,
Yeah.
whatever we want to call them, agencies or whatever, you are not there as a voting member. You are there as an assessment person, somebody to retrieve. Whereas like a treasurer doesn't need to be independent in the sense that you need to be independent.
Correct.
So you are there more as a fiduciary oversight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important for the public to understand, because if they just hear you're on these boards, they think you lost your independence, and that's
Right.
not
Yeah,
true.
these are non-voting. Where we formally are involved, we are non-voting, and the others were actually not involved at all, even in a non-voting way. But that doesn't mean we can't bring our oversight to bear.
Right. So as far as you're saying, okay, I'm running for the state auditor and I want the people to vote for me, tell me why it really doesn't matter in the auditor's position, or why it does matter, whatever you believe, what your party is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a partisan election, and that is the way it is. And so that's an interesting question about whether it should be or shouldn't be, but it is a partisan election.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that since it is a partisan election, and I'll be running as a Democrat, I guess the first question is, what should someone take from someone's partisan affiliation for this race?
Right.
And I think what we've seen in some states is that the auditor's office can be kind of weaponized in inappropriate ways, and to sort of harass agencies, to harass municipalities or schools for what are pretty clearly ideologically driven reasons. They're not where the highest value inquiries are. They're not big impacts on people, but they're sort of score settling, and you can see that sometimes. So, what it could signal is concerning. If someone had a history of wildly partisan behavior, then you might want to be a little bit worried about how that person would handle the independent work. For me, if people derive anything from the fact that I'm running as a Democrat for state auditor, it should be that my goal is not to denigrate. My goal is not to bring down or demoralize state government. My goal is to rehabilitate and build a culture of excellence in state government, which is a positive view, even when we do critical review. The other is the moment I get in office, my hope is that people wouldn't know what party I had run as. And that is to say that there's, you don't find the auditor, in my case, I would not be standing there at clearly partisan legislative press conferences. That might be appropriate for other elected statewide offices, but the auditor's office can't get in the business of doing that because it's a road that once you go down, you'll change the office forever in ways that aren't helpful. So, I think I have a pretty well-established independent streak, and those who have served closest with me know that probably the best, and hopefully their own confidence in me will indicate to others that I've always been fair-handed with people regardless of political party, that I've always been open-minded and believe that I can learn from people who are in different political parties and have different general approaches to these things. And I'm really committed, and I know because I've seen the inside of the auditor's office, and I'm really committed to preserving the well-earned, hard-earned reputation for independence that the office has. I wouldn't jeopardize it.
Well, to that statement, I must say that you've clearly explained to the public that you do understand independence as it belongs in the auditor's office. And before I ask you to tell us about your website and everything, are you ready to be really lonely?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I do have a social life, so that will continue. It's all hope is not lost. No, that's funny. No, but I get it. It's in some ways it's not like quite like being a judge, but there is a level of
judges
reserve.
get to go skiing though.
They get to go skiing and they get to talk to each other. But there is a level of restraint that you have to have in dealing with people in public offices who it would be easy to get a little too close and comfortable with in commingling the duties. So I get that, and have, even in my current role, like I've had zero social media presence for 4.5 years because I just didn't want to be wrongly perceived as crossing a line and trying to draw attention to the office. So obviously running for office, that changes a little bit. And I've been very clear with all the staff and with Doug, who's going to be auditor for the next 10 months, that not only am I creating kind of a firewall between campaign, but then my day job, which I need to keep. But that if there's any moment where they sense that I've blurred any line, please, let's immediately tackle that, because I'm really concerned about that.
And address it, right?
Yeah.
You address it, and no harm, no foul, situation.
Hopefully.
So how do people find out about you? Is there a website? Will you be on a campaign trail? When will we see you out there?
Yeah, timashe.com, pretty straightforward.
That's hard.
Yeah, it's not a wildly complicated website at the moment, because it's sort of, I'm not a webmaster, but I am the webmaster. So that will change over time. And I've been slowly getting around the state. Well, not slowly. I've been getting around the state quite a good deal on nights and weekends, and trying to encounter people who are interested in what's going on both in the state and world, and talk about the role I think the auditor's office plays that's really helpful, even in these kind of strange and difficult times for our country. So I'll be around the state, and I'm certainly welcoming any thoughts people have. I always believe that some of the best work that our office does, and that we'll continue to do if I'm in the role, is we hear from a single constituent who says, something, I always thought someone's ought to look at this program. And they explain why they feel that way. We do a risk assessment to determine whether we think there's some there, and find sometimes that drives us in a direction that is really important. So people have thoughts like that will help inform my thinking and my agenda. I certainly welcome that. You can find my contact info on the website. And I'm just very excited. It's a long way. It's not like Canada or Europe where you have spot elections and it's a sprint for 1 month. I mean, this is a marathon, but I look forward to seeing people along the 26 miles of it.
Well, thank you so very much for your time. You're always such a guest who comes with so much information and has done a learning curve.
I hope I haven't bored anyone.
No, I bore people. That's my role. But I want everyone out there, NEK-TV, thank you. This has been Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan, our featured guest today. Tim Ashe, who is the current deputy auditor, and he is a candidate for the auditor position. TimAshe.com is his website, so please go there. You can reach out to him, and I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thank you.